So this is what you're saying, that internal auditing. So for this one, internal auditing, so this is a continuous appraisal of the processes that are involved in the organization to see their effectiveness and also their efficiency. So this one is what you're saying, that it is a continuous or a continuous independent appraisal, independent appraisal of the procedures, appraisal of the procedures and the systems or the activities of the entity, or the procedures and activities of the entity. So you review the procedures of the entity to see their effectiveness and also their efficiency. So to determine their relevance and efficiency, to determine their relevance, also the effectiveness or efficiency, the relevance, efficiency, and effectiveness, and you provide recommendations as to these items and provide feedback to the management, and provide feedback to the management. So in other words, the internal audit function is a review. It carries out the review of these processes and activities, and also the internal control systems that are in place. So what then is on the basis of the scope of work covered by the internal auditors? So the scope of work covered by these internal auditors, includes, so the first one we're saying is that they monitor the ICS, monitoring the ICS, the internal control systems, and they provide recommendations. So one of the things that we talked about when you're talking about ICS is that you will rely on the work of the internal auditors. So this is one of the scope, the areas that they factor in, and then also examining the financial and operational information about the entity. So they conduct a review of this financial information, and also a review of the compliance. So also review of the compliance of the laws, compliance with the laws and regulations. The reason why they do this is to reduce the compliance risk that the entity faces, that is laws and regulations. So the internal auditors carry out an evaluation of the risks also involved, also on the management of risks, by the management. So they identify all those factors that may cause the business to fail. That is what we are saying in this case, one of the scopes covered by this. And then also they review the operating activities also and carry out investigation. So also investigations. Now, investigations mean we look at some of the matters that the organization is inconsistent with the financial statement. So also carry out investigation, and then they provide governance, or they assist the board in the governance process. That is also the governance. They assist the board governance. So this one is provide advice or provide assistance to the board, of the processes that it undertakes. So this is what you're saying, that the internal audit functions may be used in this way. So as an auditor, you can either choose to rely on this work done by the internal auditors, and in that case, the company has to. So in this case, you're saying the auditors may place reliance on the internal audit work done by the internal audit function. So what then are some of the factors to consider? The factors to consider before placing reliance on the work of the internal auditors, before placing reliance on the work of the internal auditors, the work of the internal auditors. What do you think are some of these factors that the auditor has to consider? One would be, yes, on the basis of the competence and experience and qualifications of the internal auditors. So one is on the basis of the competence and qualification of the internal auditors, This will enable the auditor to know if they can really place reliance on them, on their work. Internal auditors. So this is on the basis of how qualified are they in terms of the professional aspect. For example, an internal auditor would belong to a professional body. That is one of the qualifications that we are saying. And then also the scope of work by the internal auditors, internal auditors. Also, thirdly, another factor to consider would be on the objectivity and the status of the internal audit function. So also on the objectivity and the status of the internal audit function, So what this means is that objectivity is on the basis of how independent or how unbiased are the internal auditors, and that is on the factors on, for example, who do they report to? Who do the internal auditors actually report to? So you assess all of that before relying on their work. And then also, if the effectiveness of the internal audit functions, also the effectiveness of internal audit function, the effectiveness of the internal audit function. So this, and the effectiveness of the internal audit function is on the basis of this internal audit function. Is it headed by a competent person or a competent head? That is what you're saying. Also, the duties of the internal auditors, are they clearly defined? And do they have the relevant resources on the same? And then also, if the auditor have shown due professional care in the conduct of this internal audit function, due professional care. So this means that the external auditor is to assess whether the internal auditor, for example, has the working papers that are well arranged and everything is documented. So in this case, you're saying the external auditor assesses if internal auditor showed due professional care. And that means this, for example, is the working papers or the working papers properly planned and documented? Also, does the work appear to be properly planned? E.g., if the work appears to be properly planned, Also, was it documented? Was it also documented and supervised? Documented. You see, this concept of documentation is very key in audit. We have a famous saying that says, if it is not documented, it was not actually done. So you documenting all these procedures is a key aspect on whether the auditor will place reliance on such work. That is on the factors, that the auditor may look at before placing reliance. And then we're saying that the auditor may place reliance on the work of the internal auditors, but then what are some of these areas that he may place reliance on? So some of the areas that the auditor may place, that the external auditor may place reliance on the internal, on the internal auditors. The internal auditors would be, for example, let's say this company has many branches, internal auditors. So these are some of the areas that the external auditor may place reliance on the internal auditor's work. So internal auditors work. So take for instance, this company has over 40 branches, and this auditor is supposed to physically visit all of these branches. You see, in that sense, that may be a bit impractical for the auditor to visit all those branches. So one will be visiting the branches. And why does he visit the branches? Would be to verify the existence of some of the assets. When we say you physically inspect those assets, that is what you're saying, visiting the branches on behalf of the external auditor. So this is some of the work that the internal auditor will do on behalf of the external auditor. Secondly, what the internal auditors will do, we said when you're auditing stock, what are some of the audit procedures that you would have? For example, to verify the existence, one of the procedures will be to do what? To physically inspect that stock and also be involved in what? The stock take. But you see, let's say you have all of these branches. The auditor may place reliance on the work of who? The internal auditors in verifying those aspects. That is one of the also areas. So also attending the physical stock take on behalf of the auditor, attending the physical stock take on behalf of the external auditor, So these are some of the areas that the external auditor will place reliance on their work. And then also administering the internal control questionnaires, So when we were discussing on the ICS, we said we have 3 audit procedures that the auditor does with regards to the ICS. One of them is which one? One, the auditor does what? Ascertaining the systems. Secondly, he does what? He documents the system, or documents what he has identified. And then thirdly, he evaluates the system. And we said one of the ways in which he will evaluate the system will be to administer what? These internal control questionnaires. And ascertaining this means having an understanding of the ICS, understanding what the ICS is all about. And then you document what you have picked up on the same. So these internal control questionnaires, they are a form of questionnaires that help the auditor evaluate this kind of ICS. So the internal auditor may administer such questionnaires on behalf of the external auditors. And then also testing of compliance with regulatory requirements, testing of compliance with regulatory requirements also. And then, so this one is on the basis of compliance, you try to understand if the company is complying to the rules and regulations. And then also, they may carry out on the substantive procedures, and also pinpointing areas that the ICS is weak in. So in other words, these are some of the areas that you would expect the auditor to place reliance on the work of the internal auditor. And then also tracing transactions through the systems, also tracing transactions through the systems, to identify through the systems, because the internal auditors may actually know much more than the other auditors, the external auditors. Tracing transactions through the information systems relevant to financial reporting, financial reporting. So we have said that the internal audit function carries out an assessment of these areas. So to see how these reviews or these specific areas are examined in an exam setting, you can look at May 2016, question 2. May 2016, question 2. May 2016, question 2. Question 2. May 2016, question 2. May 2016, question 2A. So you are asked May 2016, question 2A. So you are given a company there, Apex Limited, was incorporated in the year 2012. The company deals with the extraction of sand, gravel, and stone materials for residential and commercial building constructions, as well as for road construction projects. The following information relates to the affairs of the company, during its few years of operation. So the first one, you're told Apex Limited is currently working closely with sports complexes and golf course architects to develop sand of high quality for use in the construction and top dressing of golf courses and sports complex playing fields. And then number two, you're told the company's profit has been declining mainly due to intense price competition from several smaller competitors. And then the managing director hopes that the profits will improve in the year 2017 as a significant amount of the company's long-term debt is payable by the year 2016. Apex Limited is currently involved in discussion with the banks on refinancing. And then in late 2015, a significant theft took place at the company's quarry facility. Security was lacked because it was believed that there was only low risk of these products being stolen given their nature as high volume, low value products. And then you're told required, number one, required A, discuss the reviews that could be carried out by the internal audit function in Apex Limited. So one of the reviews that you will have as an internal audit. So this one is on the basis of the types of reviews done. So this is how such a question you can look at it. So for the first one, you're told these operations that there was laxity in terms of the security. So one, you will examining, one of the reviews will be examining the operational information and the financial information, and also the financial information also. So these are just, you're being asked from the scope of work that the internal auditors may actually do. So they will carry out an assessment of the operations that are there. So in this case, so you will say the internal auditors, also the internal auditors would review the procedures and activities undertaken by the entity. For example, in terms of security activities undertaken by the security by the entity, undertaken by the entity. So this is in line with the operational information also by the entity. So that is on the basis of this internal audit function. So how best can we improve this activity so that we do not have theft cases like what you had talked about? And then also on the same note, you can say the internal auditor can review the credibility and integrity of the financial statements. So that one is on the operational information also. So for this one, you can say the internal auditors also. On the financial information now, internal auditors can review on the credibility of the financial information of the financial statements, credibility and trustworthiness of the financial statements. That is what you're saying on this credibility of the financial statements. And how do they prove this credibility? By ensuring they have been prepared in accordance with what? Ensuring they have been prepared in accordance with, with the identified financial reporting framework, This is one also of the reviews that you will conduct. And then also, you see, Roman 2, they are saying that this company is facing competition. That is one of the risks that are there in terms of the business risk. So also the auditors can carry out a risk assessment. And the reason why they carry out such a risk assessment would be to know the factors that may lead this company to actually fail. So that is what you're saying. So the internal auditors may identify, may identify those factors, that may make the company to fail. For example, that point whereby you're hearing that this company may actually be faced with high competition or the instance of the high debts, so the company to fail. So they can carry out an evaluation of this risk. This is also one of those areas. And then another aspect of these internal auditors that they may review will be on the basis of compliance. Are we complying with the laws? The internal audit function. So another review, so the review will be the review review of compliance with the review of compliance with laws and regulations. Review of compliance with laws and regulations. So the trick here is to know what the scope of work of the internal auditors actually deal with. So this is one of those areas that we identified. So they will carry out a review if the company is operating under the laws, under the confines of the laws. So in this case, you're saying the internal auditors will should regularly monitor if the company is working along the confines of the laws and regulations, along the confines of the laws and regulations. So this one is to reduce the compliance risks. So ensuring compliance of the law. That is another review that will have been carried out by this company also. And then, so this comes back to the scope of work that the auditors may actually do, the internal auditors that may actually do. And then also, they may assist the company in terms of monitoring the internal controls. So that is on the a review. Also, they may conduct a review of the internal control systems, So this one is to ensure that all the systems are effective and they are doing their purpose. So this one, the internal auditors will examine. Examine the effectiveness of this ICS. Will examine the effectiveness of the accounting and also the accounting and the internal control systems of the company, the internal control systems also. And then also, they may carry out a review of the operating activities also. Carry out a review of the operating activities. Now, for this one, the auditors may conduct, the internal auditors may conduct a value for money audit. And we said a value for money audit may entail the 3 E's, which are what? One is economy, the other one efficiency, the other one effectiveness also. So may carry out a value for money audit by evaluating those 3 E's, by evaluating economy, the economy. And you said economy deals with what? The cost of conducting these activities. Efficiency deals with efficiency and also effectiveness. Efficiency is how the process is done with minimal resources. Effectiveness is what? If they are achieving the intended purpose of those activities. And then also the internal audit function may carry out what we call the investigations also. You can add also the investigations into these fraudulent activities. Investigations also. So they may conduct or investigation. So internal auditors can investigate on frauds and errors. Suspected. Also, there are other functions of this, the reviews that these auditors may do, suspected. Also, these internal auditors can have other areas that they carry out review on. So also will be on the basis of preventing and detective basis, the preventive and detective basis. So these are some of the areas. So also the preventive and detective roles, preventive and detective roles or roles of the, so this one, the internal auditors may be involved in coming up with procedures on deterring people from engaging in fraudulent activities. So in this case, the internal auditors may create what we call, a disciplined kind of environment, in which employees are deterred, from engaging, in fraudulent activities. So that is, on that note, you are required to have at least 6 points on the same question 2A. On that note, and then also Roman part B, you are asked explain